Welcome to the Becoming Aware podcast, where I, Genevieve Faulkner, share what I'm becoming aware of.
Hello and welcome to the Becoming Aware podcast. My name is Genevieve Faulkner, your host, and if you're watching this on YouTube, hi. So, just a little note before I begin this episode, which is the shadows that rise. Part of this, I will be mentioning the Epstein Files, a couple of things that are in them. So if you are a trauma survivor and you are not ready to go there, you might want to skip this video. So it's been a week, huh? Like, wow, like it's been a week. So I want to talk about this because I think it's important because it's so loud right now. And well, you know, I am someone that would like to empower people to create their own reality, you know, create and be them and have the greatest life possible. I think it is important to acknowledge that part of the way to get there is to not avoid anything. And because this is so loud, I think it's important to talk about. So that's what we're going to talk about today, the shadows that rise. I know for me, it has been a challenging week at times. There have been times where I have felt slightly insane and triggered. I connect like everything that is coming up now with my experience a couple of years ago of leaving access consciousness. And I can see that through the lens of, so when I was part of that organization, there would often be things within classes that would be discussed. And then a couple of years later, there would be like, you know, it would be kind of like up in the world, right? And so I see like the journey of consciousness or being a light worker, you know, somebody here that's here to contribute to creating a greater world. When you're on that path, you often are gifted awareness about what's going to happen globally before it happens, right? But you're not necessarily going to know in the moment that that's what's occurring. So when I look at what's occurring now, I see it connected to what it is that I experienced then, because it connects to, you know, the shadow of humanity, like, or the shadow of what is influencing humanity that we haven't wanted to acknowledge. And I went through this process, for those of you that are not aware. I left the organization being an access consciousness facilitator a couple of years ago because there were a number of years where I was having all of these telepathic experiences with the founders, who I did know personally. Like, this wasn't like some sort of delusional thing. And this was kind of acknowledged in ways a number of times. But when I got uncomfortable about things, they then started gaslighting me. And so I left the organization. Bear in mind that at this point, I had been working as a psychic healer, you know, someone tapped into energy for over 10 years, trained at numerous different colleges around the world in psychic stuff. So I was very aware of you know, I know the difference between psychic information and my own mind, right? So there was a unraveling that occurred for me with regards to that experience that I feel like is occurring en masse now. I know for me, like, part of the pain that was created when I left was the fact that I felt like I couldn't communicate everything that I was aware of because people weren't able, not everyone was able to hear it. So, you know, I am, not all the time, but I am telepathic. So when in conversation with people, sometimes I'm hearing the thoughts in their head. And in those moments where I was explaining things, you know, my experiences were very similar to the telepathy tapes. When I was explaining things, there were the occasional people that were kind of wondering whether I was crazy. And that was painful for me. And so there was this kind of experience of, I guess, kind of feeling powerless because I couldn't share things and I didn't know how to change things in a way that kind of made me feel kind of crazy, even though I was very aware. And part of the process of kind of like shifting beyond that, because this was like something that was so, I don't know, like it was quite a shattering because as I mentioned in the previous episode, like I had such a strong belief in these two people and what it is that they taught. I could not understand how they could disrespect me so greatly, how they could dishonor me so greatly, how they could dishonor their own work, like, and because, you know, denying telepathy, denying, you know, just what went on. It was really painful for me. As I moved through it, I became aware more of why. And part of that is because I think there was an element of things that needed to be addressed in that organization that were not being addressed. So when you've got things that you're avoiding and you're not addressing them, and behaviors that, you know, you're behaving in a way that is perhaps the opposite to what it is that you're teaching, and then perhaps having all sorts of judgment for the way that what you're doing, and then needing to kind of hide it, that creates this shadow element that filters through the system, right? And me, with my savior complex at the time, who was in a codependent relationship, who desperately wanted to, you know, help my husband at the time heal his wounds and become who I could see he could be, that got transferred to those two men as well. And so I desperately wanted to help them move through the shadow of what it was that was stopping them having something even bigger than what, you know, what they had created with Access Consciousness. Now I have, for those of you that know anything about astrology, I have a 12th house stellium, which means that I'm very tapped into the unconscious of people. And that's what makes me great at, partially, what makes me great at being able to facilitate change for people or help people heal, because I can see the elements that are at play that are creating the things that people don't want. But when I'm not fully acknowledging that capacity, it can work against me in a way, because I can end up acting out or playing the part of whatever is in their subconscious that they haven't addressed. So there was that element to the creation of what it was created with them. But where am I going with this? So there was this unfolding that occurred, having to leave and having to acknowledge this dark, you know, toxic type dynamic of things that had been occurring for quite some time, through Access, you know, through the creation of their company, you know, just the way in which they treated women, you know, that journey, there was, I guess the thing that I'm linking to now was the horror of, you know, here I had this like ideal, you know, kind of, I guess, well, ideology, I can't even say that word, of what I thought Access was, you know, really tapping into this lightness, and this horror at like discovering, you know, all of these things that just were the opposite of what it was supposed to be. And so there was like this kind of like constant, I guess, processing that I had to go through in the years after that, and really look at my part in the creation of what happened. I feel like I walked through the shadow of my own world, and I walked through the shadow of theirs. That's what it felt like. So don't think I need to, I think explaining all of that would take, I don't know, so many hours. But I think that like from a being to being perspective, I believe that there was an agreement for that to occur, for that to happen. And part of that agreement, I believe, was to help to have the awareness and the resilience to deal with the now. So part of what I had to look at was, you know, the elements of my own story, like where I was perhaps projecting unhealed wounds from my dad onto, or unhealed wounds from my grandparents, or, you know, like the family dynamics onto both of them. And then there was elements, or my relationship or whatever, but there was also looking at like what part I was playing for them, and looking at like what it was that they hadn't moved through, and then looking at also the other elements of what the belief systems were that they'd taken on that they hadn't acknowledged fully. So as a channeler, when anything is channeled, it gets filtered through the subconscious of the person. And I knew this like before I even joined their organization. And I was always very careful about taking on someone's channeling work, you know, as total truth because of that. Like if they've got resentment towards women, for example, it's going to be filtered through that resentment. They're going to have a skewed view. So, but when it came to them, because I think of the patterns in my own family and the way in which I had put men on a pedestal, I couldn't see while I was in it all that conditioning. So it took me leaving to actually see the elements of access that were within this structure of patriarchy, and the, you know, the suppressed emotional energy that, or unresolved stuff that Gary had carried from the marriages that he had. You know, there's a whole universe there with Dane, but, you know, all of his stuff with regards to the abuse that he went through, and that the elements of that and the coping mechanism that he created to deal with that was quite toxic. So there was all sorts of things that unraveled, and in the unraveling, I've gained so much awareness. There has been so much growth, but it has been incredibly painful at times. It couldn't have been any other way though. So bringing it back to current day and what is happening with this week, with everything that kind of has shown up, like there's been kind of, for me personally, a little bit of re-triggering with like particularly in the elements of the disappointment, but also when you see the sides of people that you admire that you hadn't seen before, it can just be kind of like, ugh, you know, just, ugh, no, him too, like, oh my God. But also the way that it's been brought out on social media, there is so much up for everyone. And there's elements of when things are really dark, people's trauma coping mechanisms get activated. And some people can receive different amounts of the truth of the shadows. Some people go into instant denial. Other people will receive it, but they'll get incredibly, you know, rage filled, or they'll start to feel powerless. And then others start to feel like they're going crazy. And so in the atmosphere right now, there are waves of this. Some of you may not be tapped into this at all. Some of you may be happily creating your reality. And if that is you, keep doing that. Like, there will be some of you that have felt pulled into this. When you're pulled into something, there's usually something in it for you. So it's either going to activate some sort of triggering within your world that it's inviting you to look at and shift and change and transmute, or there's some aspect to it that your energy has the ability to contribute to changing. Okay, so that's important. That is so important here. With regards to it all, the energy has been so loud and intense. Particularly, I've been limiting my social media time because after the first couple of days, I was like, wow, this is making me feel crazy. So I've limited my social media so that I'm not in it too much for that reason, because for me, I would like a little bit of time for the waves of everyone's stuff to dissipate before I start to put my attention back on it, so that I can kind of get the higher awareness of what is actually being created here. Because when you look at a situation, it looks very different dependent on the viewpoint that you're looking at it from. So if you're looking at it through the lens of like the physical reality that we're in right now, it's horrific. It's so awful. Like, it is so horrible. And it's scary, and it can activate all sorts of feelings. When you look at it from other dimensions, you can see the different parts at play from a different space. And there's elements of different agendas dependent on what space you're looking at things from. So it's a little bit confusing right now to get total clarity with regards to the bigger agenda here. But that's something that I am in question about, because I think that it's important that we all ask that question. What is the actual agenda here with regards to this all coming to the surface? There is an element, I believe, as I spoke about last week, this is kind of like this global purging. It's like the shadow is coming up, particularly considering Pisces, which is the ruler of the 12th house, the hidden unconscious, that is coming to the surface to be shifted and released. That said, there's other elements at play too. So there's the natural wave of consciousness that is saying, hey, this is where we're at. Like, this is where the world is at. This is how we've been functioning that we've not been acknowledging. And then there's the people that have been in the part of this play, and perhaps the entities and demons and whatnot connected to them that don't necessarily want it to change, and perhaps have some agendas with regards to the way in which they are delivering this information. So it's important to be in question with regards to all of this. One thing I want to talk about the things that I'm aware of with regards to all of this. So first of all, like, when you've got any kind of abuse, a lot of the time there are like demon energies, like lower vibrational frequency type energies that are in alignment with that kind of behavior. So, sadistic, controlling, gaslighty type energies that get off on taking the power or feeding off the power of others. So they can be embodied, or they can be without bodies. So there can be this element of that being part of everything that is coming to surface. And for some of you, when you perceive things online, you might tap into those energies. So it's important to acknowledge that, because when, there's the responses that you have, but there's also the awareness of everything, right? And so demons, when some signs of demon awareness can be that intense rage, but they can also bring on that delusion, that psychosis, and judgment, like, and feeling like you're going in circles, spiraling, kind of like out of control type energy, anxiety, all of that stuff. So, you can command that they go to the light, like, just commanding that they go to the light. We might actually do a command in a minute once I've talked about all of this. but anytime you're aware of those energies, you can command it or go to the light, right? And it might create some sort of ease for you. Sometimes they don't have to go because they're contracted to be here by other people. So it's important to just acknowledge them, because when you acknowledge that that's there, you don't have to be the effect of it in the same way. It's kind of like, okay, there is like so much, yeah, of that. There's things in those files that are really hard to read, and particularly with regards to the way what they've done with babies. It's hard to read and it's hard to believe, and yet, yeah, I don't know. I have been kind of asking myself the question as to what that is all about. And for me, it feels like it very much connects to the shadow side of patriarchy. So, which I believe is something that is dismantling, and it needs to dismantle. And I think that the elements of control that are at play here with regards to releasing this information the way that it has are kind of like intensifying because they're trying to keep that structure at play. So what I mean by that is, I think that, first of all, I'm going to say, I do not believe that patriarchy is something that really serves men. I think that men and women become victims in that structure. Women, because their power is completely suppressed, right? It is a system that entrains women to be infantized, to be less than men, to serve men, and it does not acknowledge the true gift that a woman is and her capacities and power. You know, women bring new life into this world. Men get trapped into the system believing that they have to be a certain way in order to provide for women, which causes them to be resentful because that may not be how they are wired. You know, they may want to be a stay-at-home dad and have their partner work, right? But they're taught that they're not kind of supposed to be that way. They're supposed to be the head of the family. And so that can create all sorts of suppressed rage in itself, having to play this role that they don't want to play. But also, because of the way that women have been suppressed, there is this wounding where women have felt powerless throughout generations because they have been entrained into servitude to the partner. And then what happens in that kind of structure is some women will then disconnect or take that out on their sons. So the sons end up creating this resentment and this hatred of women because they feel not received by their mothers. And so then they go on and create like this need to get their power back by taking the power of women. And so this cycle continues. It's such a toxic cycle. I'm actually working on creating a course about dismantling, you know, setting yourself free from the structures of patriarchy. But I do feel like everything that is coming up is connected to that. Okay, so the men that have done this stuff with babies, I believe part of that is to dishonor the connection that women have to the universe that allows them to be the portals that bring in new life. And it's a way of kind of nullifying, or it's just trying to destroy the beauty of like that mother-child bond, right? It's like everything that they're doing, it's just, yeah, there's so much in that. But there's also, I know that like online, there has also been people that are saying that there's black magic involved. You know, there's all sorts of stuff about eugenics. Like there's so many different rabbit holes with all of this, and all of them could be true, or some of them could be true. but yeah, it's an intense time to be alive and to try and stay in your awareness. So with regards to what it is, okay, so just one other thing here. So with regards to the way in which this has been released, some might see that as, again, Pisces, the uprising, this is shifting and changing. Yet there may be strategy involved. So if you look at the way in which social media is structured these days with shorts and TikTok and whatnot, these 10-second clips, when everybody's posting these clips where, there's like these horrific abuse images, one after the other, and then you've kind of got like happy puppies in between. That's a way to program someone's brain. That is a way to desensitize someone from normal responses and create brainwashing. Brainwashing creates a numbness. It creates an inability to connect to your authentic self. It eradicates that so that the person doing the brainwashing has total control and can reprogram whatever they want within you. Okay, so it's important to acknowledge that element to this, because and that goes beyond just this, like that could just connect to social media in general. So it's important to acknowledge that could be an agenda at play, because if you're acknowledging it, you have the capacity to modify your behavior so that you are not being the effect of whatever that agenda is. Okay, because it's pretty dark. Yeah, unfortunately, we don't live in a world where everybody desires everybody to be powerful. There are a lot of people that believe that power is only required through the taking of another's. And me personally, I don't see that as true power. I see that as the false power that somebody wants when they have not dealt with their own wounding. And I believe that all of this is kind of being created or brought up to create that place where we all have to really deal with our wounding. We all have to look at what we are carrying, what we're holding on to, be very vulnerable with ourselves and address it and let it go. I think that's the only way to really create change with regards to all of this, because the thing is, like, as horrific as it is what these men have done, we have all been part of the creation of a society that allows men like that to be the ones in charge. And that is a scary thought, okay? That's reality. That's the world that we're living in right now, okay? And I know some of you are probably wanting to turn this video off right now, which is fine. But that's the reality. So how do we actually shift things to create a world that is one where, people can actually own their power and acknowledge their power? That's what I'm wondering, okay? So acknowledging the agenda of the element of brainwashing here. So making sure, if you are on social media, if you are tapping into this stuff, not to overload your nervous system. It's really important right now, because if there is any kind of agenda to brainwash the masses, part of that process is to, if they can overwhelm the nervous system, then it can create that break that then allows the reprogramming to begin. And so it's very important, if you're not doing things already, to help kind of balance your nervous system. I really believe that's what's required right now. Taking walks in nature, salt baths, reading a good book, taking time off social media, connecting to people in person and having, nice, vulnerable conversations, doing any kind of energy work. Theta healing's amazing for shifting and releasing things. Reiki, breath work, yoga, like doing these kinds of things that create more connection with self and more connection with the world around you. That is really what is required right now, because if you know, if you get sucked into the system at play with this shadow rising is about creating as much separation as possible, I believe, because that's where we become controllable, right? Now, the way in which this has been released may also be designed to put us in places where we feel powerless. Like we've not got no power in this situation because we don't have, you know, the money, the resources or whatever that these people have. It's really important to acknowledge your power in this, okay? And it's important to also acknowledge, like, as I mentioned with regards to the demons, you know, entities like that function on those kind of like lower, like, or insidious, dark frequencies, they enjoy the game of deception. So they will promise you something or act like they're going to deliver something, and then surprise, it's actually about taking your power away. So with regards to everything that's being released, if you see this from the perspective of perhaps some people in charge having these attachments that are trying to create as much separation and powerlessness as possible in people so that they can have control. And, you know, I don't know what the agenda is beyond that. I'm not quite sure, like, what the desired outcome is. But, with all of that, it's kind of like you've got to be compliant in allowing them to have that power and that control. So it's important right now to kind of command that any of your power be brought back to you, any of your energy be brought back to you. Because what happens when there's this mass kind of triggering, that creates energetic vortexes that can create, like, it, you know, when there's mass triggering of lightness, like, for example, when Taylor Swift did her Eras Tour concert, right? There was so much kind of like that created kind of like vortexes that contributed to creating healing for a lot of people, because they were able to be in the energy of the songs that allowed them to express everything that they'd been suppressing, and that created this kind of like energetic vortex that allowed that to be transmuted off the planet. Now, the same thing that can be created for the darker realms as well. So when there's this mass triggering of all of this darkness and delusion and like disappointment and mistrust, you know, that can create whirlpools of kind of dark energy that you can get pulled into. So it's important to keep pulling your power back to yourself, your energy back to yourself, centering yourself, which is why these nervous system things are really important, but also commanding it. So, you know, you can just close your eyes and command that any place, space, time, reality, dimension, timeline where you have given your power over to any of the people involved in the Epstein Files, for that to no longer be. Everything that's allowing that, any contract, oath, vow, commitment over time, space, realities, and dimensions, that has allowed that to be nullified and void. And then you're going to command that all of the energy that you have allowed to be outsourced to be brought back into your universe. And you just pull all that energy out of their universes. Pull it all back into your world. Okay? That is your energy to create with. So don't allow don't allow the hidden agendas to control you or to take away your power. Acknowledge the power that you do have, because with the element of feeling powerless, that's where, you know, things are able to have more control. So it's important to acknowledge the power that you do have, and it's important to look at how you can use that power to create a greater reality right now for yourself, if this is something that you feel connected to, and also how can you create something greater for the world as well. And that might be something you know, that you do, or it might simply be just allowing yourself to be in your own space, acknowledging that you are, you know, something different on this planet. Just doing that can create a change, right? But if you get pulled into the places where you feel powerless, where you feel like hopeless, where it's too horrifying, you know, that's where you're falling into one of those kind of dark vortexes. So don't let that happen. Focus on personal power. Make sure you're, you know, doing some sort of work. And don't agree to letting anything have control of you. So there was something else that I wanted to mention in this. Yeah, so I do feel like part of the process of this unraveling, it is really important for each of us to really look at, if this is something that has pulled you in, you know, what is it bringing up for you, and doing something to release that energy, because patterns cannot repeat if the energy is released. When we let go of whatever it is that we're holding on to around victimhood, around oppression, around war, around conflict, you know, all of these things, around being powerless, it creates a different possibility. And energy communicates. Like, we receive so much information energetically from the world around us all of the time. When we release stuff within our own energetic field, other people can tap into that and receive a different possibility for themselves, and they can start to shift too. So if you feel powerless in this situation, if you feel triggered, if you feel traumatized, do some work, okay? That's my little, yeah, do some work. And I mean that for, you know, regardless of whether you're a man or a woman, like, it doesn't really matter. Like, we're all on this planet. Some of you may be feeling a lot of trauma, you know, coming up, horror. Others of you may be feeling shame. So it's important to look at all areas. Like, part of, I guess what I would like to invite those of you that are listening to this to look at is, you know, if you're a woman, look at where you have been perhaps victimized, suppressed, or allowed yourself to be less, to fit into a patriarchy structure. But also, if you're a man, perhaps look at what suppressed rage are you holding on to with regards to women? Because I do believe that in order for this to be the current reality that we're in, part of the structure that creates patriarchy is the conditioning that men have to be strong, you know, solid as a rock, and not express their emotions. So they bottle them in, and that creates this intensity of energy that they don't know what to do with. And that can be used to create, you know, all sorts of stuff that we don't want to create on this planet. So if you are a man, look at what you are holding on to. What is the rage within that you need to address and release? And if you're a woman, you might want to do that too, or where you've been the effect of that rage. What rage towards men do you have for the suppression that you felt, or that your ancestors have felt? Are you carrying ancestral rage? So this is the invitation for you to look at that, release it, move your body, do something to shift that energy. Acknowledgement is key, because when you acknowledge something, a lot of the times it can shift. Sometimes there's other things that need to be brought in to change it, but you know, yeah, we all have our different ways. So I hope this has been helpful. The only other part that I think that needs to be said is, what is really key right now to having ease is acknowledging what you're aware of that others cannot receive. Because if you're not acknowledging your own awareness, then you get sucked into other people's emotional states to kind of like assimilate to what the general kind of population is feeling. And if you're willing to acknowledge your awareness, it allows you to perhaps have elements of knowing how to shift and change and release things, but also know what you need to kind of, address or change or choose in your world, and what it is that isn't relevant to you, right? Yeah, I hope this has been helpful. It's been a bit of an intense week, so I get that you might be like, what? With this one, there's been a lot kind of going on. So yeah, if there is any questions about anything that I have talked about and you would like me to answer them, feel free to leave them in the comments. If it's been a contribution to you, feel free to let me know. And if there is something that you would like me to talk about more, feel free to ask me in the comments as well. Just so you know, I did do a course a few years ago around reclaiming your capacities with entities. It does help when you're willing to acknowledge what you kind of are aware of. It can stop you being the effect of it, which is important right now because it is very loud. So if you're interested in that, I am in the process of updating it. So it is like an evergreen course that when you get it, you just keep getting the updates as they come in. So yeah, you can check that out if you want to on my website. Thanks for listening, guys. Yeah.